They fired me on a Tuesday morning, calling it a streamlining of operations, but as the CFO's polite lie dripped into the air, I was watching the clock. At 9:15, the compliance servers I'd built from the ground up would run their quarterly sync. For the first time in 10 years, I hadn't renewed their licenses. In a few minutes, every safeguard they relied on would quietly vanish, and there'd be nothing they could do to stop it. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe if you want to hear how I turned their own system into the perfect weapon. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. They called it a transition meeting, but I knew better. Sitting across from CFO Thomas Keene and HR Director Marcia Clay, I could feel the smug efficiency radiating off them. They had their severance packet neatly stacked, my name printed in bold like it was a formality they'd been practicing. Thomas gave me the corporate smile, tight, rehearsed, empty, and said the words about streamlining operations and aligning resources. What he didn't know was that his clock was already running out. I kept my face calm, hands folded on the table, while my eyes flicked to the corner of my phone. 9:12 a.m. In exactly 3 minutes, the compliance servers I'd designed, maintained, and personally monitored for over a decade would begin their quarterly sync. Every license, every regulatory certificate, every single piece of code that kept the firm in good standing with the SEC, the FINRA, and every state banking commission, it was all about to be checked, updated, and renewed. Except this time, I hadn't renewed them. Not one. For 10 years, I'd been their invisible safety net, making sure these systems ran like clockwork. Without those renewals, the sync would throw red flags across every jurisdiction we operated in. And because of how I built it, those alerts would hit all their inboxes within minutes. I nodded as Thomas droned on about valuing my contributions, my mind already miles ahead, visualizing the dominoes I'd spent weeks lining up. At 9:13, Marcia slid the non-compete clause toward me. At 9:14, I signed it with a steady hand, knowing it was legally meaningless in the scenario about to unfold. At 9:15, as I slid the pen back across the polished table, somewhere deep in the server room, my absence had already started the countdown to their collapse. For 10 years, I was the quiet backbone of Hensley and Keene Capital, the one nobody saw but everyone depended on. I didn't wine and dine clients or take glossy photos for the annual report. I sat in the corner office with a double monitor and a door that was rarely closed, building the compliance framework that kept us from being gutted by regulators. I designed the renewal cycles, the audit prep schedules, and the automated reports that let executives brag about our flawless compliance history. The irony was that every smiling speech they gave was made possible because I never missed a deadline, never let a license lapse, never gave the SEC an opening to breathe down our necks. That was the job. Invisible, but essential. And invisibility has a way of making people think you're expendable. Last quarter, during a closed-door leadership meeting I wasn't meant to overhear, I learned they were planning to streamline my department. Thomas Keene wanted a younger, cheaper face, someone dynamic, who could bring fresh energy to compliance. He'd already found him. Connor Blake, a 29-year-old with a resume padded with buzzwords and a golf membership that matched the CEO's. The plan was simple. Push me out quietly, install Connor as the new director, and save on salary while pretending it was an evolution. What they didn't realize was that the entire compliance structure ran on my fingerprints. I knew every interlocking deadline, every failsafe, every clause that could trigger a trading freeze if ignored. I knew which state licenses had renewal windows so narrow that missing them by a single day could halt operations. And I knew they didn't know any of it. So I stopped being their invisible spine. I didn't sabotage the system. I simply stepped out of it. The renewals came and went without my intervention. I didn't send reminders, didn't log into the vendor portals, didn't authorize the auto payments. Every day for the next 6 weeks, I walked into the office, did the bare minimum, and left exactly at 5. My silence was my preparation. By the time Thomas handed me my severance packet, the structure I'd built was already hollow. All that was left was to let gravity do its work. At 9:15 exactly, the quarterly compliance sync began. I'd timed my exit meeting so perfectly that I was still sitting across from Thomas and Marcia when the first pings started lighting up their phones. He glanced at the screen, tried to keep talking, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. By 9:17, those pings became full-blown alerts. State license renewals marked expired. Federal certifications flagged non-compliant. By 9:20, the SEC early warning system had issued preliminary notices to our Chicago and New York offices. Marcia's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup as her phone buzzed again and again. I didn't need to see the messages. I knew the sequence by heart. First, local regulators flag you. Then, your ability to transact in that jurisdiction is put under review. It's not an outright suspension yet, but it's a chokehold. And in our industry, even the rumor of non-compliance can spook investors faster than an earnings miss. By 9:25, 3 of our regional offices were effectively paralyzed. The compliance dashboard, my creation, would now be painting their screens a violent shade of red, each warning a breadcrumb leading back to the same root cause: expired credentials. By 9:30, I knew the calls to IT had started. They'd check for system errors, patch failures, anything to explain why a firm with a spotless record was suddenly bleeding alerts. They wouldn't find one. The system was functioning exactly as designed. I walked out of the meeting without a word, severance folder under my arm, my badge still active for another 24 hours. On the elevator ride down, I imagined Connor, sitting in my old chair watching the disaster unfold with no idea how to stop it. By 10 o'clock, the firm's trading desk in Chicago was frozen pending investigation. From the sidewalk outside, I could already see the first storm clouds forming. And the beauty of it was, they thought they still had time to fix it. They didn't realize the first fractures were only the beginning. When a single branch fails compliance, it's bad. When multiple branches fail at the same time, it triggers an entirely different level of scrutiny. By noon, the holding company that owned Hensley and Keene Capital had been flagged for a full-scale review. That meant every subsidiary under the corporate umbrella, real estate lending, wealth management, even the boutique investment arm in Boston, was now frozen. Contracts waiting for signature were shoved into drawers. Incoming wires were held. Payroll for over 600 employees was suddenly pending regulatory clearance. The client calls started pouring in. Some were furious, others cautious, all of them demanding assurances that Thomas and Robert, our CEO, couldn't give. Because in our industry, the moment your regulatory status changes, every counterparty has the right to halt transactions without penalty. By 1:30 p.m., our largest institutional client had formally paused a $400 million asset transfer. By 2:15, a hedge fund we'd been courting for months pulled out entirely. By 3 a.m., Bloomberg ran the headline, "Hensley and Keene faces multi-million-dollar compliance breach." And that was just day one. I didn't need to lift a finger. The system I'd built was doing exactly what it was meant to do, flagging problems and locking down operations until they were resolved. The difference was, I wasn't there to resolve them. In the offices, I imagined the mood shifting from confusion to panic, from, "We can fix this," to, "How do we survive this?" And sitting in my apartment with a glass of wine, I knew the answer. They wouldn't. Because once the dominoes start falling in compliance, there's no hitting pause. Every step of the collapse was automated, irreversible, and documented. Proof that the company had failed on its own watch. By the second morning, my phone was lit up like a Christmas tree. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers. Even Robert Hensley's personal line, ones I hadn't seen in years, were flashing on my screen. The voicemails all carried the same strained tone, a mix of forced calm and barely contained panic. The CEO's assistant promised a generous consulting arrangement if I could help stabilize operations. Thomas Keene's message was shorter. Name your price. Just call me back. I didn't return a single one. By day 3, the calls had multiplied, but so had the headlines. Financial media had picked up the story, speculating about fines, investor withdrawals, and internal leadership missteps. The board chair left a voicemail that almost made me laugh, inviting me to return in an advisory capacity, as if my loyalty could be bought back with a title stripped of authority. They didn't understand that the damage was already locked in. Regulatory processes move like glaciers, but once they're in motion, nothing stops them. By day 4, the first round of official fines became public record. The numbers weren't catastrophic yet, but the reputational hit was permanent. Every potential client doing due diligence would see those marks for years. I let the phone keep ringing, knowing each unanswered call meant another sleepless night for Thomas, another failed attempt by Robert to calm the board, another day Connor sat in my old office drowning in problems he didn't even have the vocabulary to describe. The reversal was complete. They were begging, and I was silent. On the 6th day, the compliance servers completed their full cycle. Every missing license, every lapsed certification, every expired permit was now cataloged in a neatly time-stamped report, one that regulators automatically received through the secure portal I'd set up years ago. The SEC didn't shut them down outright. They did something worse. They placed Hensley and Keene under continuous monitoring. That meant every month, without fail, the firm would have to submit full compliance documentation for review, pay for quarterly audits, and maintain a dedicated liaison with federal regulators. The cost wasn't just financial, though the millions in annual oversight fees would be enough to make the board sweat. It was reputational. No major client wants to be associated with a firm that's essentially on probation. Internal morale cratered. Recruiters began circling, poaching talent that didn't want to stick around for the slow bleed. I read the announcement in the industry bulletin over breakfast, taking my time with my coffee while imagining the morning meeting in the boardroom, Robert stone-faced, Thomas pacing, Connor shrinking into his chair. They'd think about calling me again, maybe even draft another desperate email. But by now, they understood the truth. There was no fixing it. The system was functioning exactly as I designed it, to protect the firm from itself. Without me, it had done its job too well, exposing every weakness and sealing every exit. I hadn't destroyed them. I'd simply let the system eat itself alive. A week later, Robert finally tried the one thing he hadn't yet, offering me my old position back, full authority, a pay raise, even a public statement framing my return as a strategic restoration. I read the email twice, not because I was tempted, but because it was almost poetic how far they'd fallen. I didn't reply. Instead, I archived it and went back to my morning walk, the city moving around me like nothing had happened. Back at my apartment, I opened my secure drive, reviewed the final set of compliance reports, and locked them away. Then I deleted every contact I still had from Hensley and Keene. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no parting speech. Just absence. They'd walk into that office every day knowing I could have saved them, but chose not to. Some exits don't need applause, only the sound of a door closing for good. They thought stripping me of my title would erase my value, but all they really did was hand me the perfect opportunity to let the world see how much it depended on me. And once that truth was exposed, there was no taking it back. The core message here isn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It's about understanding your true leverage. In a corporate world obsessed with streamlining and efficiency, it's easy to forget that the quiet, consistent work often holds the entire operation together. When you know your worth, you also know how fragile the system becomes when you're removed from it. My decision wasn't made out of spite alone. It was about allowing natural consequences to surface when leadership underestimated the foundation I'd built. In life, we often rush to fix things that others break, even when those same people have treated us as replaceable. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is to step back and let reality do the teaching. The goal isn't destruction, it's accountability. My former company survived, but not without scars that reminded them of their arrogance. And for me, the victory wasn't in their struggle. It was in walking away knowing I never compromised my integrity. How to get started today. 1. Document everything you do that adds value: emails, systems, results. 2. Learn every detail of your role that others overlook. 3. Recognize the difference between helping and enabling. 4. When someone underestimates you, remember that absence is sometimes the loudest answer. If this story made you think differently about your own value at work, drop a comment below. Share it with someone who's been through something similar, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that cut to the truth behind corporate power plays.